Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Align, Engage, Fulfill, the podcast that delves into the very nuanced world of career development and business growth. On this show, we challenge the status quo of workplace culture and dive into the work it takes to build transformative and human-centric workplaces where people and purpose drive profits, not the other way around. I'm your host, Clarence Moore, and today we're exploring the evolution of the modern workplace with John Lee, the owner and operator of VectorX Scripts Ranch here in San Diego. In a world where companies are grappling with return to office mandates and the office is dead narrative, John is providing a different answer. His mission is to show how community-focused workspaces can be a strategic tool to engage employees, spark innovation, and build company culture. What makes John's perspective unique is his extensive background in two seemingly different worlds, finance and hospitality. He combines the ROI-driven mindset of a financier with a service and experience focus of a hospitality expert to redefine what a workplace can and should be. This conversation will deconstruct the role of the physical office in today's world and explore how leaders can strategically leverage their workspace to build a more aligned, engaged, and fulfilled team. Good morning, John, and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Clarence. Thank you for having me.
So the reason why I wanted to have you on the show, John, is because we share really a common goal, and that's to redefine and shape the future of work. But before we dive into that, I want to know the story behind how you decided to go into the co-working industry. What is it that led you to want to do what you do now?
So I spent 21 years total in finance. Towards the end of those 21 years, which would take me back to around, I would say 2018 or so, I felt that I was starting to get a little bit burnt out. It's a high pressure, high stress business industry. I always had aspirations to own my own business. And so I started doing a little bit of digging. Our previous city where we lived in Miami, where I was working, I was kind of by myself from my team because the rest of the team was up in New York. So I was by myself going into an office to sit at a desk and work literally by myself. There were other people in the office, of course, but they were in different divisions. So we were friendly, but we didn't really engage or interact together. And as I was coming to the end of that career, I started to think about how I want to transition. So I started to look for businesses that I could buy. And I started to look in San Diego because in San Diego, it's not a finance hub. So if I wanted to move to San Diego, which was my ultimate goal with my family, I would have to look to do something different. I had to pivot. And so I started to look in around 2018, 2019 for different industries. I started to go down the rabbit hole of the SMB world, reading, buy, then build, going on to SMB Twit, which is like another whole universe, sub-universe within Twitter of the SMB professionals on there. So I learned a lot from that alone. Then COVID hit. That eventually led to me departing the industry. Not planned. I'll be perfectly honest. I actually did lose my job because the positions I had kind of blew up during that 2020 period. Ended up moving to a different finance company, to a different hedge fund, and that wasn't a great fit. So I lasted there maybe about 6 to 7 months. And then I decided, okay, well, if we're going to make the change, we got to do it now. And meaning make the change to move back to California and also pivot to this next chapter of my life. After we moved here in 2021, I started to really dig deep into looking for a business to buy. And ironically, I think 2020 with the whole COVID experience of people losing their jobs, and for some reason, the SMB world blew up. And it felt like there were so many people that now finally wanted to go out and become an entrepreneur. And so it was an intense environment where you just could not find anything that was viable. And if you did, it would be gone within days. Like there would be multiple LOIs, and that still exists to this day. I've been hearing from a lot of people, search funders, entrepreneurs that are trying to expand, people that are trying to get into entrepreneurship. It is extremely difficult to find a business that you can buy that's relatively safe and generates enough income to afford the lifestyle of living here in San Diego. And I think that's also why there's not a lot of businesses that go for sale, because in order to live here, you have to have decent generating income. So after doing this search for months and months and months, one of the business sites called Biz Buy Sell, which I think a lot of SMB people know, I saw this posting for Venture X, and I didn't know what it was. The word venture felt like it was something VC related. Yeah. I clicked into the link, saw just for a few minutes, didn't really register with me what it was. I kind of, discarded it and then kept doing my search. And a couple of weeks later, it showed up again. So I clicked on it again, did a little more research, and then just reached out for an initial call. And that's how basically I found Venture X. It was a franchise.
It's almost by accident.
Yeah, it was. And because I had no idea this industry even existed, not to the extent that it does. I had heard of WeWork, of course. I've been into Regis, I've been into WeWork before in other cities. I just didn't know the business model, how it worked. I always thought that it was more of like an incubator. If you ever watch Silicon Valley, the HBO show, you got the guys that are working out of that house, and the owner of that house basically takes equity in those guys' startup in exchange for giving them space, right? And housing. And I thought that's what this was initially, Venture X. So one of my first questions I asked when the salesperson for UFG, the parent franchisor, called me was, is this an income generating business, or is it more like you take an equity stake? He goes, oh, no, it's an income thing. So that's when I was like, okay, that's when I got more interested. And then I did a discovery day. They flew me out to Palm Beach where they're located. And there's one of the two original early Venture X's that opened were out there. I visited those. And during that whole process, it just became more and more apparent to me that this was really going to be the next wave of the way people worked. I know our slogan is the future of workspace, and I really do believe that because, and this was just a conclusion that I came up to on my own, but I felt like, human beings, when you give people a taste of something like the whole work from home, I worked from home during the COVID crisis in Miami, and, like most people. And of course, if you remember back to that time, the fear was that, oh my God, what's this going to do to the companies? And they're going to crash because their productivity is going to drop and they're not going to be able to get anything done. And what happened instead was like everyone survived, and not only survived, but a lot of them thrived.
Yeah.
And my feeling was that, okay, when employees realized that the world didn't end and that COVID was going to be, once COVID was over, they were not going to give this up very easily. This whole concept of remote work.
Yeah, because that's how it's a reference.
You have it as a reference, and getting your work done while also being able to stop work for 30 minutes and have lunch with your family, or it's just a game changer, right? And so I felt very strongly that it was going to be really, really tough for companies to pull them back in to what we call pre-2020, which almost feels like
So long ago.
yeah, like it's almost like a prehistoric era of working.
The coworking industry has grown incredibly
Yes.
large, right? So in 2025, reports are showing that the market size for the coworking space industry has reached about 13 billion.
Yeah.
That's billion with a B. What is that? You kind of started to allude to this already, but what is that number? What does that market size say about the state of work culture in 2025?
So I feel like, and when I had my one-on-one meeting with the head of UFG, his name is Ray Titus, and we sat in a room together, and he said the exact same thing that was on my mind, that I felt like this industry was basically in the first inning of the game. Now we fast forward 4 years, I still feel like we're in the early stages, maybe inning 3 or 4. So I feel like there's still a big growth ahead. I do think that there will be changes and things will evolve a little bit differently than what's happening now, because what we're seeing now today is also very different from what we saw in 2017, 18, and 19, right? Just to give you one example, back then, the whole open space concept was what really appealed to people. After COVID, people demanded more private space, like an office. So if you look at some of the older original Venture X's, they have a lot more open space and less private offices. And then after COVID, all the ones that opened afterwards, it was all private offices and then some open space. And I think even that's going to evolve as well, because even offices, you can build out small ones or big ones, and that's already changing too. So I feel like we're still in the early stages, and that the numbers that you just threw out is still not, we're not even close to reaching peak.
Yeah, the industry definitely it's in the infancy stage.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So let's talk about kind of one of the most prominent debates
Mhm.
in the remote work
Yeah.
conversation, which is the return to office
Yes.
debate.
Yeah.
People are stuck between, or I guess business leaders are stuck between like expensive empty spaces
Mhm.
and then a desire for the culture that they used to have.
Yes.
So, from your on the ground perspective, like what is the biggest mistake that you see companies making right now when they think about their physical space?
I think that there's been a lot of return to office mandates, right? Increasingly, especially over the past maybe 12 to 18 months. The people that are inside our industry, within our industry, kind of joke about it, and we call it's actually a quiet layoff. We don't really believe that they feel that's the most optimal way for their employees. It's just more about during 2020 and 21, a lot of companies overhired because we had a huge injection of capital of money into the economy from the government, and companies were just hiring left and right. And now that we're starting to kind of catch up to that, people realize they're a little bit bloated, they overhired, and so that they need to lay people off. And one of the easiest ways to do that without quote unquote laying them off is giving them a hard decision to either come in every day or give that up. And after a lot of these companies went remote and allowed their employees to work remote, people moved. San Diego got a lot of people from San Francisco, LA, other parts of the world, country that ideally they would have loved to live here, but maybe their industry wasn't present here or didn't have offices here. And now next thing you know, they do. A lot of them moved here. And then now if you're saying that, your headquarters is in Pennsylvania somewhere and they're asking you to come back 5 days a week, it's impossible. Right. So what's my decision? Like, what's my option? My option is I have to quit. And the inside joke within our industry is that this is just a way for them to lay people off without laying them off. And it's not necessarily they're doing it for the best interest of their workforce, because there's several studies, and we're talking about third party neutral studies that have done this, and they're not pure return to office mandates, they're not pure work from home mandates, but one of the recent studies I saw was when they saw employee engagement. The highest employee engagement came from companies that had a hybrid model where they had people come in 2 to 3 days a week. And like a standard, bell curve distribution, you're seeing that not only here in my space, when we see most of the people here come in 2, 3 days a week, some people come in 5 days a week, some people come in one day a week, some people I see maybe 2, 3 times a month, right? But the majority, the one standard deviation of the meat of the bell curve, they're here 2, 3 days a week. And that is what the data is showing across the country. There's a company called Castle Data System that tracks all the security badge access for nationally. Their system is used in a lot of buildings, office buildings, and
The
they
co-working space.
no all offices across all industries, high rises in New York, in San Francisco, all over. And they've been tracking this for years and years. And if you look at their tap in rate, right, where employee has to come physically to the building and tap in. Pre-COVID, that was over 80%, which makes sense. During COVID, that dropped to about 20%. And since COVID, since the reopening, it's been slowly going back up. But it's stagnant. It's stagnated at 53% right now. It's been between 50 to 53% for the last 2.5, 3 years since I started this business. And I knew that a lot of people were going to want to come back into a workplace, but not the same boring old drab office that they were going to before, something nicer and better, and also not every day. And that's what we offer here. And of course, co-working and flexible office space is not for everybody, right? It doesn't work for everybody. We don't go after every single industry. So we feel like that transition is still happening. And it's going to continue to happen for the next, decade plus.
So it's almost the debate is almost a forced decision that the organizations are putting on their employees.
Yeah.
Who do you think? I mean, I think I can venture to say, no pun intended, what the answer is, but who do you think holds the power in that dynamic, in that decision making moment?
Employees 1000%. And I'll tell you why. Because if you are a company, and most companies have a competitor, right? Unless you're SpaceX, or even they have competitors, or Tesla, but even they have competitors now. If you have competitors in your industry, that are maybe younger or newer or smaller, and they offer that flexible model, where do you think the best talent is going to go? Right? This is a talent recruitment tool as well as an engagement and productivity tool for companies. So if you just are, stubborn about mandating 5 days back in office, you're going to lose your best talent because there's so many people. You do surveys of companies everywhere, and a lot of them, maybe majority of them, over 50% are willing to take pay cuts in exchange for a flexible work schedule, which says a lot about how valuable this is. And so over time, because this is still very new for a lot of these industry leaders, the C-suites at the Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, is a very new concept. And it's, they don't like change. They don't like these type of, this is why they're resistant to these structural generational changes that we're seeing. But what's going to happen 10 years from now? You're going to see younger blood going into C-suites. They're going to be more willing to offer hybrid, which is why that some of the biggest users of hybrid work policies are in tech, right? Because typically they tend to be younger, more upstart, fast moving, nimble. And that's exactly what fits right into our MO. It's flexibility, right? We're not locking you into a 5-year lease, a 10-year lease, 20-year lease. If you need to grow, great. If a lot of startups fails. If you need to abandon, you're not locked in for a year or 2 years. So now, of course, now the bigger companies that don't have that problem are going to have to offer it anyway, because again, they're going to lose their top talent to their competitors that will offer that. So it'll be by force or by choice. And the ones that are very forward looking are doing it by choice. And vast majority of them, I've not heard a single bad experience from companies that have gone to this model.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's a missed opportunity. And maybe call me naive, but one of the most common conversations right now in the workplace is compensation, right? And people, wanting, needing, demanding more equitable pay.
Yep.
And, it's a very, challenging conversation for sure. But I think that there's an opportunity here in terms of, what remote work and what co-working spaces provide. Obviously, there's organizations that are locked into 10, 20-year leases, but if they're not, or if they're nearing, I think there's an opportunity to get rid of that physical space, reinvest that money into compensation and improving compensation for employees.
Yeah.
Right?
We're already seeing that. And the reason why I've been telling people that 2025 is the year that this transition is really going to start to happen is typical traditional leases are some are 3 years, but a vast majority are between 5 and 10 years. So if you think about 2025, we're at the 5th anniversary of COVID, right? So any company that signed a 5-year or longer lease before COVID hit, those leases are now coming due. And we're seeing it all the time now. Companies are now they're not renewing their lease, or they're downsizing their available needs. And then they're going kind of a distributed model, like a hub and spoke model, where they maybe keep their space, but they downsize from, let's say, 20,000 to 6,000. And then they either open up flex offices around the county or the city, or they just give their employees a stipend to go and work out of some of those facilities like ours that are close to where they live. And it's also one of the reasons why we try to target suburban areas, because we try to target those that live nearby, as a big residential community nearby, so that if they do need to go into an office, it takes them 5 minutes rather than 50 minutes.
That's huge. Your mission, and I say your mission because this is based off, obviously, I looked into your own tenure, but your mission challenges narrative that the office is dead. What do you think is the most common misconception that leaders have about what the purpose is of a physical office in 2025 and beyond?
I think so. We don't think the office is dead, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't be here. It's just the office is changing and you need to change. It has to be more than just going into a place and having a desk and sitting and punching away keyboards at a computer. It has to be very intentional. And, to give them credit, a lot of companies are realizing this. And so the ones that are renewing their leases are doing it, but they're also um, rethinking the design and layouts of the space. A lot more open space, a lot more amenities filled, um, things that when you come in, you go, wow, like it feels refreshing. The vibe is nicer. You can get collaboration time with your coworkers, but then you can also have your privacy time. You have places where you can take calls. So that's happening as well. It's just that the needs overall, if you combine them in aggregate, um, they are downsizing. So, which is why you're seeing vacancy rates in offices rise nationally. Right? It just hit above 22%, and it's the highest it's been in decades. And it's going to continue. And central business districts are probably at the highest risk of this continuing to be a distress situation. So,
So mentioned culture, you mentioned engagement, and I want to kind of pull on that thread a little bit
mhm,
because I think that that leads to a bigger debate about remote work. And something that I always say, and a strong philosophy I've always had, is that we're products of our environment.
yeah,
And it seems like the real question isn't whether remote work hurts company culture, but how it fundamentally changes the purpose of
mhm,
why we gather physically.
yes.
So, from your perspective, what do you think are the specific elements of culture that are most at risk in a fully remote model? And how can a third space like Venture X be strategically used to intentionally rebuild those elements?
Yeah. So mental health is a big issue. I think people know that by now. Coming out of COVID, the survey showed about 60% of people have affirmed that they've gone through some type of mental or emotional period where it was not optimal. Human beings are social creatures. And this was actually one of my thesis on why I felt like I needed to get into this business. Um, there's certain people with personalities where fully remote, 5 days in at home works for them. And then there's a few people that really love going into an office every single day for various reasons, whether it's productivity, quietness. But the vast majority of people, I think it's more of a social thing, right? Human beings are social creatures by nature. We want to be around others, not all the time, but definitely some of the time. And again, going back to this whole 2 to 3 days in office, I think that's why it works for so many people. It's because think about when you worked in a traditional office before 2020, right? You go into an office every single day. You go to your desk or cubicle or, office, you close the door or you just, you're staring at your screen all day after that, right? You can easily do that at home, right? Unless it's a very, very, uh, you know, industry where you need to be around others a lot. So it touches on like a social emotional aspect of human beings and our desires. And so, yes, of course, the benefit is that you do get to collaborate while you're inside on site, but it's just more about the little everyday things where the human touch, the human contact is so important. Right? You come in here, just to give you an example, and the reason why I laid out our co-working areas right as you walk in is so that people that want to work out in the open have a certain personality where they need that constant motion and noise because there's some people that work better in a library quiet environment, and then there's some people that work better in a coffee shop environment. I'm the coffee shop environment guy, right? I don't want to be in a quiet place with everyone's sitting still reading. I want some vibe and activity because I want to feel like I'm part of life, and that's why I was intentional about putting those co-working desks right there. And you see that every day. People that sit there, they talk to each other, they go to the water dispenser or the people coming in to go to their office, and they just naturally run into each other. And that was intentional, so that people coming into the office in the back will run into people there, and people working there will run into people as they're going to the back. And so, if you look at our initial layout of those desks, they were supposed to be way in the back, and I told them, no, you got to bring it out front because it's got to be part of this openness. So I think that's probably single handedly the biggest
Just
yeah impact.
I can speak to that too because I mean I'm here. I'm at Venture X. I'm in a private office, and I find myself at the end of the day realizing I didn't step out of my office one time.
Yeah,
I think when you're in a confined space, you get comfortable.
yeah,
You kind of get tunnel vision that
sure,
you lose track of time,
sure.
and you don't have the luxury, I should say,
Mhm.
the interruptions of that social component, which I think for people like me, who I mean, I don't consider myself fully an extrovert, like I'm an ambivert. but I am a social person, and
Mhm.
even if I'm not interacting directly with people, I need the hustle and bustle
Yep.
to make me feel energized.
Yep.
So yeah, I absolutely agree. It was true for my previous role too, where I have my private office, and I found myself
Yeah.
10-hour days. I
Yep.
couldn't step out of my office one time.
Yeah.
So I want to pull on another thread
Sure.
because I think a lazy popular narrative when it comes to remote work is a simple generational battle. Gen Z wants, or at least this is the narrative, Gen
Mhm.
Z wants remote while boomers want everyone back in the office. And I suspect that the reality is far more nuanced than that, and that the stereotype is more of a distraction than a diagnosis because
Yeah.
I have, spoken to and I've seen Gen Z professionals who actually want to be in office.
Yes.
And on the flip side, I've seen boomers who actually prefer remote work because the flexibility to be with their
Yeah.
family uh, is important to them. But what are your thoughts? Like, do you agree, or do you think that it's a lazy narrative, or what do
It's
you see?
so it's funny you mentioned this because I actually did a presentation as part of my networking group, the previous one, where I showed a graph of the age cohort that were 5 days remote, work from home. The biggest cohort was 60 years and over. I think it was 60 or 65. So that is an absolute false narrative. I think it's just, we're generalizing too much.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's a generational thing as much as I think it is a human being psychological thing. Whether you're Gen Z, Gen X like me, millennial like yourself, I'm guessing, or Gen Z, whatever. It's We're still human beings. You cannot change that. Right? That's in our DNA. So I think that's the way you have to approach it, as from a human being perspective and not from a generational perspective. And when you think about it from that lens, it's basically it fits that it's more, people want to be out and about, right? You go out to like the restaurants and there's people congregating, like places like One Paseo. They're just out there, and that spans all generations. So it's not a generation thing, I don't think. Now, obviously, the younger generations have never done a full, in office work. So that's probably where the difference comes from, the experiences. Like Gen X has done in office. Boomers have done in office, right? Even millennials have done some in office. So they see the difference, whereas Gen Z has never done it. So I think the experience part is, from both sides. You're afraid of what the for the older generation, they're afraid of how this is going to change things, and from the new generation, it's like you're afraid of how this is going to impact their own, the way they work. If they were to If you think about the horrors of going into an office, into a dark cubicle, and we're getting things done that way. So I think there's just fear on both sides, but I think it's just, for me, I always look at it through the lens of human beings and human nature.
Yeah, I think it definitely is more like it's not more so a generational thing, but more
Mhm.
of a life stage thing.
Yes, that too.
Just in part because there are a
Yes.
lot of younger people who are in a different life stage than their peers.
Yes.
So I think that's in part to shift the narrative in that direction.
Yeah.
Because I do think too that there are Gen Z professionals who want the mentorship that they would be able to get from being in person. Who
Absolutely.
kind of, and to your point earlier, there are younger generations or younger professionals who would thrive more in that type of environment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in my work, I talk a lot about business to employee, which
Hmm.
is, how a company markets its values internally.
Hmm.
And the physical office is one of the most significant B2B marketing investments that a company can make.
Yeah.
What message does a flexible, community focused workspace like Venture X send to a team versus a traditional long term lease in a, for lack of a better term, sterile office space?
Well, first thing, I think it sends a message to your employees that you're listening, because every survey you do, employees are, demanding this. B, that you're willing to make changes. And then C, even financially, you're being smart. We have several members here that are big companies, and they've come from a bigger space and they've downsized. And I'll just give you one example. We have a Fortune 100 company. It's an enterprise company. They started doing this early 23, little 2.5 years ago. They decided to do away with, I think, over 90% of their offices around the country.
Wow.
And they kept a few in like the major hubs. And they told all their local teams in every city, okay, you can use this platform because our industry has platforms just like an Airbnb, but for co-working and flex space. You have the ability to go onto this platform and look for a space where you think you and your team could best get their work done. And the local San Diego team for that company found us through that platform. They came in, they had been using other spaces around the city. And this is a team of about 20, 25 people, right? And if you think about a team that size, then location doesn't matter because you're going to have all 25 distributed all over the city. So you have to try and be central as possible so that not one person isn't going 40 miles while the other person is going 2. But you do have, but the location becomes less important. And at that point, it's just more about, okay, what is the intention? What is this environment like where we can get work done? So they came in here, they loved it. So they asked me to give them a proposal for where they can work out of here all the time. And this company only does in-office, in-person meeting twice a week for Fortune 500 company, Fortune 100 company. And then the rest of the time they're out in the field or they're working from home. And after they did this nationwide, they mandated this nationwide. A year later, they came out on a YouTube video. After 1 year of data, they found that their savings on real estate was 80%. Now think about, and they titled the video, you can find it on YouTube, they titled the video, The Hybrid Dividend. This company is saving so much that they actually consider it almost like a dividend, right? And think about what you can do with that money.
Right.
You can use it to recruit, give your employees pay raises, upskill, training. And at the same time, their employees are now even more, happier than ever, engaged than ever, right? And their 2 competitors are now battling it out over this. One of them is trying to recruit the third one that is not doing this. This company that is here with us now, if you compare the stock chart of them to the other 2 competitors, it's blowing them away. Because the founder of this company is very, very forward thinking, right? And so you have to be. You have to be. And this is where I feel like the older traditional blue bloods, the big, big large corporations with the C-suites that are, in their 60s and 70s, they're the ones that are actually at risk, and they're doing themselves a disservice, not just to their employees, but to their shareholders by doing this. I'll give you another example. Allstate Insurance, they're not a client of ours. I just read some articles about them. A few years ago, they went fully remote. And I think their annual revenue is about $6 billion. And when they looked back and did a study, their real estate related costs went from about 450 million to under 200 million. So they're saving about 250 million and change, somewhere around there. And that is an almost 5% add to their margin. I mean, think about it. For a company of that size, 5% is a massive, massive deal, right? So you have all these evidences, not just for employee engagement, but for emotional well-being and financial. And it boggles my mind that there's a lot of companies that are still fighting this and trying to push in the opposite direction. And I feel like they're doing not only themselves a disservice and their companies and their shareholders, but they're not going to win. I can pretty much stake a claim that they're eventually going to end up having to concede, because I think 10 years from now, 20 years from now, however long it takes, the trend is very clear to me. And I don't think it's necessarily going to mean that it's going to stay intact the way it is now, right? To give you an example, when we opened this place, I created a lot of smaller offices because that's what the demand was, for offices for 1 person to 2 person. And in hindsight, I probably should have built out a couple of larger team suites, because I've actually had to turn down some of these companies that are now finally coming to that decision point where they need to give up their space, but they need a space for 20, 30, 50 people, right? And I don't have the space for that. So I've had to turn them down because I built out a lot of smaller offices. And I feel like a lot of the industry has done that. So now the next wave, I think, is going to kind of like the pendulum's going to swing back where we're going to start to see bigger offices within the flex space where you can accommodate, bigger teams. The flex industry has been around for decades, 30, 40 years, I think. So it's not anything new. But until COVID, it was always geared towards that solopreneur, 2-person team, 2 to 4 person startup, the accountants, the lawyers, individual practicing, white collar jobs, but they're insurance agents, right? With COVID, that's changed now, right? Where now you're seeing the bigger companies come in and they can't use a 2-person office. When they have 50 people, they need to have share, right? So now you need something for, that can fit maybe 20 to 30 people. Because again, out of the 50 people, not everyone are going to come in at the same time. They're all going to come and go. And then as they come and go, they're going to overlap. And on those days is when they're going to have that collaboration and in-person time where you can do the mentorship, right? So the industry is going to continue to grow, but just the way that spaces are laid out, I think is going to continue to evolve.
So all the numbers, all the data are showing favoring this remote or hybrid setup. Why do you think business leaders are refusing to accept it or refusing to work within that kind of new system, the environment?
I think it's just stubbornness, and fear.
A lot of people are saying control. Do you think that that is true, or what are your thoughts?
Control and fear, I think, are the same thing in this context. Because if you give your employee the freedom to work from home and not track them, like if you come into an office, you can kind of basically see if they're getting work done or not. But if you can't track them, then you're losing control, right? And the fear is there. So I think that's one of the big, key motivations, which I think is unfortunate because bottom line is you either get the work done or you don't. And if you don't, I think there are ways to track that, right? Without having to be big brother.
It'll be evident.
It'll be evident, right?
Other work is
Yeah. And they'll self-select out either through, and there'll be attrition either because of lack of performance or productivity. That'll show up, right? And I think that's a small price to pay to give up that control to, in exchange, get a much better talent that has the option to go anywhere they want, right? But if you offer this as an option, that's a huge plus factor in your favor. So I just think it's just you think about the older generation, and I do think that there is, of course, like you said, control and fear, but just stubbornness, doing things the way that it's always been done, not really willing to evolve or change or adapt, right?
which I think I want to say, I think this is important. Like, I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing or something to kind of like look at as a problem, because when you look at the conversation between like what, again, it's a generalization, but what Gen Z wants in terms of remote work and what boomers want in terms of remote work, a lot of it comes from the environment they grew up in, right?
Yeah.
Gen Z, when they first started their professional careers, most of them went into it during COVID.
Yeah.
And so what they know is remote work.
Yeah.
What they know is hybrid work, and that's their reference point.
Yes.
So for them to adjust to this fully remote concept, that's hard for them to make that shift, that mental transformation. And the same is true for the older generations who grew up in this model of in office 40 plus hours a week, very structured, right? And then for them to have to shift to now accepting working remote, working like with flexibility. And I think it's important for people to recognize that when they have this conversation, to be able to actually have a productive conversation that is meaningful.
Yeah. But you go back to historically, why do some companies that become wildly successful and then fail, right? A perfect example of that is Blockbuster, right? When Netflix first came on the scene and they kind of laughed them off, and now there's one Blockbuster left in the entire world, right? Because they were stubborn. They didn't see that where this was headed, right? I mean, I don't think a lot of us did. When I first heard about what Netflix was, initially it was like a mail and exchange program, right? Where they would mail you the DVD, keep it as long as you want, and then switch it out. The whole digital thing didn't even, I don't think, cross a lot of people's mind. I mean, obviously some smart people did figure out that was eventually where it was going to head it. But the people at Blockbuster, laughed it off, right?
They had an opportunity.
They had opportunity to buy it and they didn't, right? I think that's just an example of the stubbornness and not being willing to admit that, you know what, you could be wrong and that you have to adapt, you have to evolve continuously, right? Google's another example right now, right? People, they've had 80%, 90% market share in search for the longest time, right? But why they're being smart, they're pouring billions and millions into AI because what's going to happen eventually, right? I don't know about you, but I've stopped searching Google. I've searched Google less and less now, and I go directly to ChatGPT or Grok or whatever, because the results that come out of that on some of the searches that I'm looking for are much more detailed and robust. And so, Google is adapting to that as well. And my guess is that search is eventually going to go by the way of, the way Blockbuster Video was, right?
And how do you, my background is in marketing. Yeah.
Right.
Like my heart goes out to this, is their job is completely changing.
Yes.
I don't think they even really understand how much their job is going to change.
Yeah.
But I do want to talk about so my firm's primary framework is that business success lies in kind of this convergence between the three most misunderstood things in business, from my perspective, which is leadership, marketing, and strategy. Those are the most gray areas in business. Right? It's not binary the way that finance or operations or HR.
Sure.
And so my whole methodology is when those three things align, that's when you really start to see things thrive. And to me, that leads to the topic of entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Because my belief is that the most engaged teams or the most resilient teams are teams that are built on a culture of entrepreneurship, right? And I think company culture is a big topic right now in the workplace, and companies are trying to think about what kind of culture they want to build, things of that nature, which the truth is they can't build culture. Culture just becomes as a product of
it has to be inherent in you.
Has to be inherent. And I think for businesses to really go with 2025 and beyond, they have to adapt more of a culture of entrepreneurship, which is, I think, one of the most interesting things about co-working spaces and the co-working industry, because it empowers that type of culture, right? Like to be in an office setting where it's not just your coworkers and you're not bound by traditional office politics, but you're able to work environment with other people who are building businesses, who are working in different industries, and to feed off of that.
Absolutely.
It becomes more of that incubator that you were talking
about. Oh, no, absolutely. And, if you are one of the best benefits, and I see this all the time now, is the cross collaboration, but the businesses that are being done between members, whether you're sitting next to each other or you just meet them through the water cooler, as I mentioned earlier. I mean, there are countless examples of that happening here, and I'm sure every flex office is a co-working space is seeing that. And so and also when you give people the freedom to go into a place like this, it gives you a sense of ownership, right? And what is entrepreneurship? It's all about ownership, not just ownership of your work, but also of what you're building, personal growth, building teams. That sense of ownership is, you're giving the keys to a car that you can now have some control to drive. And obviously that comes with their responsibilities, but that's where, I think it is really important to be able to drive, because, entrepreneurship is becoming more and more popular. There's several members here that have a day job, and then they come in either before or after their day job to work on their passion project, their side hustle, whether it's with the intent to continue that or to eventually evolve into taking that on as a full-time gig, right? you know that better than anybody, right? We have a guy two offices behind me that is doing exactly that. He's in construction, but he's doing his own thing, and his goal is to eventually start his own construction company. And you see that everywhere. So the drive, the platform that this allows you to get that done is, I think, really important. And I meet people every week that are, even the ones that do have full remote work capabilities, they just had a baby. They can't, concentrate. There's too much distractions. The postman's ringing, or the Amazon delivery, or the Uber Eats person is banging the door, the washing machine alarm goes off, or whatever it is. It could be a number of reasons. And I personally went through this myself. Like during COVID, I remember sitting in there at the desk in my apartment in Miami, working away, and my son was 3 at the time, so he was still home, and I'd be constantly getting come up to and tugged at, right? I'm trying to get work done. And I knew that eventually that was not going to be an optimal situation full time. And so in finance, there are days when it's busier and other days when it's quieter. And what those are, after working long enough. I think most industries are similar. There are certain days when there's a lot more activity happening and you need to get more done. And, if I had a place like this that I can escape to, I would have loved to have done that. So I think it's the best of all worlds, you know, that we're offering here.
Well, I mean, I think it speaks to something that you brought up a little early in the conversation, the concept of workplace design. And actually, like one of my favorite books, James Clear's Atomic Habits, he talks about the importance of workplace design in your ability to develop the kind of habits that you want. And I think that, excuse me, for the business leader, like if you want your team to have accountability,
Mhm.
want your team to be engaged, if you want them to have ownership over the role, or feel like they are uh, a, an owner within the organization,
Mhm.
like you need to allow them to design their workplace in a way that empowers that enables that. So you told me when we last spoke
Mhm.
that you think the solution to kind of this workplace problem is a hybrid model,
Yes.
right? Why do you think that is? Just for those who aren't in that conversation, why is the hybrid model the answer to this problem of what workplace culture is going to be?
Because it checks all the boxes, right? You get in person. You do also have the flexibility to work from home, so that if you get your work done earlier, let's say you're someone that has the ability to work from home a couple of days a week, and you can choose those days, right? If you want to get all your work done Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, so that maybe you want to take a 3-day weekend on a trip, I mean, that's an amazing thing to have, and you still haven't lost any productivity. You also get the benefits of the emotional connections, right? This is more from the employer, but you do save on costs, which every business should be looking to save on costs. So for me, it's just a no brainer. And then of course, in a space like this, where you have all these different industries and people representing different businesses, from accounting to legal to, startup to tech, AI, marketing, financial advisory, all of that. We have people here doing all sorts of different things, right? And it's not just about, okay, I want to go and try and get this person's business or sell them my business or try and buy their business. It's more about like, you know what? I have a question and I'm not sure, right? So I'm going to go ask, Joe Smith, the lawyer in Office 240, because, we talk and just, pick their brain for a couple minutes. It's not going to cost me anything. They're happy to chat. You know, think about the benefit of that, right? You cannot replicate that by working fully from home or working in a traditional headquarter office.
Well, I think the difference in that dynamic again, where you're talking to somebody and you don't have the office politics, you
Mhm.
have the baggage
Yeah.
of that interpersonal relationship, like just the impact on the kind of conversation and engagement you would have with those kinds of resources.
Yeah.
I think is something that people hadn't even maybe began to really think about
Yes.
in terms of the value of being this type of.
Yes. And I'll tell you one thing about people that are in business for themselves, which most of the people here are, or even, for the most part, people like to help others. They like to feel wanted and needed and important. So if everyone is feeling that way, or if most people are feeling that way, then it's just naturally going to be the case that you're going to want to help find a solution for this person's problems. Or if I can't help, then I know somebody over there down the hall that can, because I spoke to them last week and I know what they do and what they specialize in, right? You see that all the time here, right? Obviously, we help facilitate that. Yeah. Joaquin is the master connector, my manager. So, I mean, those are just the things. And at the end of the day, yes, we're obviously, running a business and we like to keep people happy for that. It makes you feel good too, right? It makes you feel good that this person had an issue and you helped them solve it. And it was a critical issue, or even something simple. It could be anything from home life to marriage life to kids to work, coworkers, their industry, fundraising, whatever it is. It just, every time, you know, you see someone benefit, it's just it's a great feeling.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
So we're about running out of time. We're there's so many things that we can talk about, and I feel like I say this in every podcast.
of course, excuse me.
Bless you.
Thank
Which
you.
is so true, because I think when we're talking about the future of work, there's so many just nuanced things that we have to talk about if we're really going to transform it, or what the future of work is going to look like. But time is limited. So for the leader listening, maybe is reevaluating their workspace.
Yeah.
What are the first 2 or 3 questions from your perspective that they should ask themselves and their team before making any decisions?
Well, first of all, when I said financial benefits, that's important. But what's more important is what your employees want, and also what is available out there where you can turn something into what your employees want. So when you're looking at a real estate strategy, and this does not necessarily mean, just go out and give up your space and, go into flex, because maybe that's not the right answer. Some companies do need a big space, where flex doesn't make sense for them. But look at your real estate strategy up and down. Speak to not just brokers, but other flex space and other people in the industry, and anyone that has made that shift, to see where they've seen obstacles or difficulties and where they've seen the positive benefits. So I would say that it's critical now more than ever that you have to keep your options open, and that again, that could mean that you stay as you are because maybe that works best for you. Think about the layout of your workspace. Think about you as your own employee coming into the space. How are they going to feel, right? One of the things that we always get is one of our feedbacks, especially right after we open, because these type of spaces were not as common, but they're getting more and more common now. But 2 years ago when we opened, I would get this reaction all the time. People would come in and they go, wow, that wow factor. When you first see that kitchen, the lounge, all the nice soft seating, everything, it was a constant, right? Probably less so now because I think people have gotten used to it. But you want people to want to go into somewhere where they don't necessarily want to be home all the time, right? And so, listen to your employees, because even if it doesn't matter if it's a low performing employee or high performing employee, middle ground, whatever, their feedback to you is the same feedback you're going to get across any employee out there, right? Because again, going back, this is a human thing. This is not a hierarchical thing. It's not a generational thing. So that's what I would really focus on, is just listen and be open-minded, and don't change just for the sake of changing. If you're going to go from one pot into another pot, it doesn't make sense. And if you're going to stay where you're at, think about how you can change the layouts, make it more intentional, more, welcoming. Think about just the little things like lighting, right? It's a big important thing that I'm starting to get more feedback on. The types of lighting, like the mood lights, it's important. Like, people, it's psychological. But the other thing too is, traditional leases that historically have gone 3, 5, 10 years, and this is more for the bigger companies that have, uh, whether it's shareholders or, financial balance sheets, that has to go on your liability side of your balance sheet, anything over a year long, right? Well, if you have a flex space where you don't have you have a month-to-month term, that no longer needs to go on the liability. It's just an operating expense. So that changes the game. Like if you want to go to a bank and they ask your financials, it changes your debt to income ratio, all the ratios that they look at when they're underwriting. Maybe you need a business loan to expand. Now it becomes an even better reason for you to do that, right? And that's because accounting rules changed. I think 4 years ago, where now anything over a year has to go on the balance sheet, and you don't need to do that if you're in a space like ours.
I think that's such a like important single endpoint that I don't hear a lot
Yeah,
of people talk about when it comes to this conversations.
yeah,
That's definitely a magic moment right there.
yeah, yeah,
And I also want to touch on something that you said, like you used the word high performing team, and I think for high performing, and I think that this is something that's important for people to maybe realize when it comes to shifting into this more remote hybrid space is that I think this is going to absolutely redefine what high performing is because we're looking back at the history. High performing has always been defined in the context of a physical workspace,
yeah,
and for people who don't thrive in that type of environment it might maybe would be
yeah,
difficult for them
yeah.
to
It'll
grasp
cap them.
or to
Yep,
would cap them onto their performance.
yep.
But going into a new kind of environment that is a hybrid or a fully remote model changes the definition of that. It will provide people the opportunity to elevate themselves,
Yes.
perform differently than they used to.
Correct. Correct. Because there's some people that are maybe not as social, and then there's some people that thrive in social settings where you really see the true colors of the potential of that person. So having that flexibility, again, you know, you even within employees, there's going to be a wide range of different personalities, right? So people are going to have different wants and needs and what works best for them. Um, make the environment as flexible as possible for them, and you're never going to know if a bird's going to be able to fly until you throw them in the air. And if you keep them trapped in a cage, then you're never going to know how well they can fly. So open that cage door.
One last question. So looking ahead 5 years, what do you believe will be the most important feature of any successful workplace?
Going back to the personal aspect of this business, it's 100% community. I know that's an overused term nowadays, but
But I think it's more important now. Like in the age of AI, like
absolutely. And it's going to get even more important. It's going to have even more significance. I've actually envisioned like having like humanoid robots roaming around this place, going to offices and like, asking, how are you doing today? Like, can I get you coffee or whatever? Right. That's great. It's very futuristic, but also removes a human element. So we have to figure out ways to keep that human element important and intact. So having that community, AI will never overcome like the human connection. It can't. So the more you focus on that and providing people an environment where they can, uh, where that is a key element is going to be like, that's the only answer really, because anyone can just turn an empty office building, cut it up into small individual offices and sell them and never be there, just be an absentee person. And, people are just kind of coming and going on their own. Anybody can do that. So, the community aspect is by far the most important, which is why this business will never be an absentee business for me. Because I personally enjoy interacting with people. It's that I think that's going to be a big key differentiator for flex spaces as we go forward.
Well, John, I think that's a very way to end it. Community. I appreciate you being here. This has definitely been a illuminating conversation.
Thanks.
What the future of work needs to look like.
Yeah.
So if you're a business leader listening to this episode, definitely take these insights in because I think that it's very important for us to continue to advance this conversation. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, John, somebody wants to pick your brain, somebody just wants to connect with you about, the co-working industry or anything else, what's the best way for them to get a hold?
Yeah. So best way is email john.lee, Lee at venturex.com.
You also have a event coming up in November that is a fundraiser. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So again, going back to this, harking on this point about wanting to help others, one of our in-house members, they do great work. Me and the founder, we've become not only, she's not only become a client, but she's also a friend now. and her organization's called the Skinny Jean Project, and they do type 2 diabetes prevention work, which means they work with medical groups, hospitals to do preventative work. Diabetes, pre-diabetes is one of the, if not the biggest ailment affecting, I think, about almost 100 million Americans, which is almost a third of Americans. And now with recent changes to the CDC and then the HHS and the funding, it's more critical now than ever. So we're doing a fundraiser event. It's called Casino Royale. We did one last year for the first inaugural one. This year we're bringing it back. It's on November 15th, Saturday, here at the our courtyard downstairs and our common area here. And it's a great cause. But it's also going to be a lot of fun, great prizes that we're giving away as well. And so, we'd love to see you there. And if you are interested in either attending or being a sponsor, please reach out to me again at john.lee@venturex.com.
Perfect. And you brought up November of last year, which is actually, I was telling John during pre-show that when I first, my first week of, joining VentureX as a member, I think that Saturday was the very first time that they did that Casino Royale event. But I remember in our conversation when I toured the office, you told me that your dream is to have a unicorn come out of VentureX. So if I'm somebody who believes to my core and that I'm going to have a unicorn, I want to rate space here at VentureX, what's the best way for me to do that?
The best way is to go on our website, venturex.com, navigate to San Diego location, which is where we are, and book a tour. I personally do the tours, so I will show you around. I'll show you the available spaces, make introduction to our staff and maybe even some of our members. Well, we've had people come in for a tour and then they go, "Oh, so-and-so is here," or, "Oh, I know you," and they start talking. And then again, it just warms my heart to see that.
John, thank you so much for your time today and giving and sharing all your insights about this new kind of world that we're moving into.
Yep.
And we really appreciate you being here today.
Thanks, Clarence. It was a pleasure. And thank you for inviting me. I really love sharing the story too. So.